You're listening to ChooseFI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. ChooseFI, your home for financial independence online.
Jillian Johnsrud, and I am going to do some coaching today with Corinne. She's one of our House of Fi people. And yeah, we're going to kind of dive in just for context. If the larger ChooseFI audience doesn't know, or if Corinne's like, who is this crazy person they paired me up with? I am Jillian Johnsrud. I am a progress coach. So I essentially just help people make progress in their money, in their work, and in kind of their goals and the things that matter to them. And I had sent Corinne over some homework. So we're going to be kind of using that as the basis of our jumping off points. And actually, 2 of the exercises I sent her are part of a free 10-day course I have. So if you're like, I really want to have the answers to those myself, that is on my website, jillianjohnsrud.com. But Corinne, thank you so much for being the coaching guinea pig here.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be a guinea pig. Looking forward to it.
We'll see. We'll see by the end of it. So we are going to jump off. I had you do a couple exercises, the be, have, do, the highlight reel, and kind of the ideal day. So I've got a whole bunch of pieces of paper with all of the things that seemed the most true and exciting for you at the moment. I just want to kind of go through that and think about this question. The question we'll ask as we look through all of this material is, what do you want to see happen by this time next year? So all of these things that you wrote down are things that are important to you, but maybe not all of them are something that you're really going to focus on this year, or you really want to make progress on this year. Or maybe you're like, I feel like it's important to me, but I've nailed it. Like, it's great. That part of my life is taken care of. So we'll kind of look through and see what feels exciting, what feels important, what feels urgent, what feels like I'm just ready to dig in and see some stuff happen.
Awesome. Sounds good.
So we'll start with your be, have, do. Was there anything that kind of jumped out of that you really want to focus on?
Yeah, I think for me, this is kind of stuff that I've been working on just over like the last 6 months. So this was really cool to actually kind of put it into a framework. But I think what was kind of most eye-opening for me on that is how you had me by each thing kind of say, okay, is this going to take time or money or commitment? And I think looking at that, the thing I realized is I want to really be good about prioritizing my time and making the most out of my time during the day to kind of focus on the things that matter the most, finding some way to hold myself accountable to those and have that commitment. Because something like meditating and exercise, which have been really helpful for me, they don't take a lot of time, but for some reason I struggle to fit them in, just whether it's due to that commitment or they're just kind of the easy things to shove off till the next day or the next day or the next day. So I'd really like to kind of come up with some kind of system that helps me to incorporate those things a little better and be more committed to the little things that help make my day better.
Yeah. I did a podcast episode with Gretchen Rubin, and I think the ChooseFI guys did as well. Have you ever heard of her Four Tendencies?
Yeah, I have. I actually listened to that episode on the ChooseFI podcast. Yeah, that was really
nice. Is there one that kind of resonates with you, or have you taken the quiz and you're like, that's me?
I did. Yeah, I took the test and I got Upholder, which I think to some extent makes sense because I generally do kind of make time as for the things that are important to me. Like, I'm not super susceptible to like peer pressure and stuff like that. I think the problem becomes that gets to be just too many things that I want to do. And so then deciding which of those things is most important. And I think for a long time, my identity has kind of been wrapped up with work. And so that's always been the one that's taken the most priority. And so kind of just retraining my brain to understand that there are other things that are important too, and you can do it. It's just a matter of kind of reminding yourself that you don't have to feel guilty for doing those other things.
Yeah, I find with working with upholders, it is kind of just like what you described. They're really good at getting stuff done. They're really good at being productive and to standing by the commitments they make. But the struggle can be clarity because they know they can't commit to everything and actually fulfill those commitments. And so really getting clear on what matters the most, and so that they can feel confident, like this is a priority for me. So hopefully these exercises bubbled up a little bit more focus and clarity.
Yeah, it definitely was interesting because even just looking at the things I wrote down and recognizing that something work related really only came up on there once. So it kind of is a reminder that that takes up the majority of my time, but that's not really the majority of how I find my worth and my value, and just kind of getting those things aligned.
So in that list, you mentioned meditation. Was there anything else you would love to see some progress on this year?
I think obviously with me getting into this ChooseFI adventure, I think the thing I'm really looking for progress on is to kind of develop some kind of plan surrounding financial security or financial independence, because I do see, just from the limited amount of time that I've been kind of soaking this stuff up, I see how that can be a gateway to a lot of the other things that I do want. So I think right now I'm just kind of in the baby steps of exporting my expenses every month and like just being aware of them. But I'm not to the point yet to really know like, okay, what actions do I need to take? So like thinking about like, where would I like next year? For 2021, I'd really like to have a plan of like, this is my budget, these are my expenses, this is how I want to spend my time, this is how I want to spend my money, like just having more action items around that and feeling really confident about kind of where I'm going with that.
Yeah. Is there anything from where you are now to where you, like, in your mind, what that looks like? You mentioned being more confident. Like, what would it take to bridge that gap?
That's a good question. I mean, I've always thought of myself as being like decently good with money. Like I'm an accountant, so that's definitely like a stereotype. But I think where the confidence comes from is just I didn't have like a great awareness. For example, like I don't know like what's a reasonable grocery budget for a household of one. Like just things like that, of just having some kind of baseline understanding of what my expenses should look like and where I can do better. Like I've always maxed out my 401k, but doing things outside of that, I've never been really confident in. So just kind of figuring out, I've been told I should be doing a backdoor Roth, but that's like scary to me. I don't know how to do that. So just things like that, of figuring those things out and really having a plan for like where to put my money rather than just like letting it sit in a savings account.
Okay. So it sounds like you're saying have a better understanding about investment, like just how to invest, and maybe more awareness around kind of where your money is going versus how to optimize that.
Right. Yeah. Because like I have an investment account, but it's a taxable investment account. And so now I'm like, I don't know if that's really what I should be doing. And just making sure I'm optimizing what I'm doing. I guess that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. What has worked in the past that's really helped you to learn and become more aware? Has there been anything that's been really consistent?
I'm definitely like a learn by doing type of person. Like I'm not the type of person who can just read an article or watch a video and be like, oh yeah, I get it now. So that's kind of why I'm trying to really do the like exporting of my budget every month and really kind of having like hands-on practice at it, so to speak. And then just, I guess, repetition. And I would love to make it like as automated as possible. Like anything that I can set up to just happen automatically without me thinking about it, like that's definitely going to help me a lot.
What about for investing? In the past, when you've had to kind of acquire new information, is there a way that you feel like you learn best?
So honestly, I really just been doing like what my family told me to do for like the last 10 years, which I mean is good. It worked and it got me to where I am, but definitely just kind of trying to take in new information. I think I'm probably getting to a level where the complexity might be a little higher, or there's options that maybe I haven't considered before. So just trying to figure out where do I go for those sources of information, which is part of obviously what led me here, just to get input from different people and understand what's worked for them and and how that applies to my particular situation.
Mm-hmm. When you think about other things that you've learned, does it tend to work better like if you read a book or if you listen to something or like you take a class or you work with a friend and you kind of figure it out together?
Yeah, I definitely like talking through things. That's
Okay.
definitely helpful to me. Like I'm much better in like a group setting, I think, but I am better probably with a book than with listening because I'll reread the same thing a few times to kind of help it soak in. I mean, I can do that on a podcast too. A lot of times I'll find myself like rewinding and like re-listening, but it is nice to definitely have somebody else to talk through things with and to kind of bounce ideas off of.
Nice. It's important to always look at how we've been successful in the past. I used to do a lot of hiring. So I think I've interviewed like 200-300 people. And like the number one rule of interviewing was that future success is based on past performance.
Yeah.
So however people performed in the past is probably what you're going to get in the future. Whatever worked in the past will work in the future. And that's just a great place to start when you're thinking about how can I make progress is what do you know has worked? And let's start there. And so I think there's a lot of ways in that investing that you can kind of combine the book plus talking.
Yeah.
Whether it's a book club or it's taking a class or even kind of like ChooseFI mastermind group or just a study partner that you can kind of combine what's worked before and at least start there. See if that works going forward.
Yeah.
But with investing, it can feel pretty complicated and overwhelming. But to some degree, I think that's just the investment industry trying to make it complicated. For most people that are capable and smart, it's maybe a 2 or 3 hour education. During quarantine schooling, I was trying to teach my 6th grader his math. Much harder. So hard. Apparently, I am not capable of doing 6th grade math anymore, but investing seems fairly straightforward in my brain. So there's hope. There's hope. And meditating, by this time next year, what would that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like so like when quarantine started, I was very like, I'm going to do this every day. And I had like a little calendar on my refrigerator that I checked off every day and everything like that. And then I kind of got into my ennui phase of quarantine and just gave up on all that. So kind of trying to develop some level of consistency, but also probably sensing when it's needed, because it's not necessarily something that I just should do every night before I go to bed, which is what I was doing. It probably should be something where I've become more in tune with myself and recognize like, hey, this is a moment where I should take a 5-minute break and step away. So that's what I would like to be able to get to, is to get to a level where I can really kind of read my body a little better and just understand when I need to kind of step away and take that break and have the presence of mind and the calm to be able to do that.
You mentioned you were doing kind of a daily habit. Is that something that you would like to incorporate or more sporadic?
Ideally, like I would love for it to be daily. I think that's something that I can always benefit from. I think also just the timing of it, maybe finding a time that works better for me rather than when I'm tired and want to go to bed. Maybe that's part of it. But yeah, I think it's something that was definitely helping, and I think it can continue to help me. I just want to make sure that I find a way to help make it stick, I guess.
Okay. I divide our priorities for the things we want to make progress on and the action steps we should take into 2 categories to focus on. One, there's the things that are really high leverage. There's a huge return on investment for taking those actions. And the other category of things that tend to help us make progress are things that are really foundational. And if we can do those foundational things, it makes everything else in our life a little bit easier and helps us just make progress across the board. And for a lot of people, meditation, for myself included, it's a very foundational habit. Makes everything else just work better and easier.
Yeah, that's kind of how I see it too. It's just having that kind of baseline calm or peace or whatever.
Yeah. So one of the things in kind of my process, I always create a little list of action items for you to do. And one of them will be around this daily meditation.
Okay.
And what I like to start with is whatever this habit is that you want to develop, starting a 2-minute version of the habit, because habits tend to develop in stages. One, it's just finding a place for the habit in our life. Getting the sequence started is kind of another phase that needs to happen, and then optimizing it. And oftentimes we try to do all three at once. We try to pick the most perfectly optimized habit in the perfect spot and like have everything work out. And it just, that rarely works. Starting with a 2-minute habit, it does two things. It can help you test out when is an appropriate time and just get through the learning curve of getting it started. But the second thing I want you to, even more important than that can be kind of, even if it's like real hit or miss, the thing I want you to pay attention to is when that 2 minutes is supposed to start. If you feel any hesitation or any resistance to doing that 2 minutes, I want you to start to be really curious about what is that thought process that's giving you that hesitation. And this is the reason I pick a 2-minute habit. And it could be exercise or reading or writing or whatever it is that people want to do, is that there's very rarely a valid excuse. And when we remove all valid excuses, we get to hear what our brain is trying to create.
Yep.
And it might be, oh, you're just too busy. There's this other thing that's more important. And when we know kind of that, where that hesitation's coming from, then we can deal with that head on.
I like that. Yeah.
So a 2-minute habit, be really curious about what that narrative is in your head. And the second thing that can make it more successful is pairing up that habit with an existing part of your routine or creating a prompt.
Yep.
In new habits, it's so hard to just randomly, magically hope it comes into our mind. So pick something that you already do every single day. Like, I'll do this after I eat breakfast, or after I brush my teeth, or right after lunch, or after I get dressed, and marry it up. Or put like a timer in your phone.
Okay.
So it pings you that your 2-minute meditation time is starting. And eventually, once it becomes more established, you can get rid of the prompt. But to start, it's usually helpful to do one of those two things. Okay, so back to the big picture. We have this meditation for this year. We have awareness and confidence around your finances. What are some other things that you feel really excited or motivated to make progress on?
I think the other kind of biggest thing is related to my career. I'm at a point where I am trying to make partner in my firm. And so that's something that is exciting to me. And I definitely am looking forward to that happening within the next year. So just kind of making sure that I stay focused on that, not let it be all consuming, but also stay committed to that and disciplined in some respect, even when it can be kind of a slog, especially with everything that's going on in the world right now. It's just a little hard to sometimes stay focused on the big picture and things like that. But it is something that is really important to me and I think is really important for my future. So I want to make sure that I stay committed to that and that goal that I have.
Okay. And what would that look like throughout the year?
That's a great question. I think just making sure that as I'm going through and prioritizing things, I think something that'll really help me is having really good focused time so that I can get the most out of my hours. So if part of my thing is I want to work less hours, maybe that's okay, but how do I stay really focused while I'm in those hours? Because that's definitely been something that I struggle with. And I think that's part of the reason why I end up having to work more hours. So maybe if I can come up with some way to, I don't know, train my brain or myself to really just stay focused and motivated during that work time and not really let other distractions get in, that'll really help me with the progress that I need to make.
Are there any other, call them like mile markers, not necessarily like a goal, but when you see the mile marker that you are on the road in the right direction to go towards the goal? One time I saw a mile marker that helped me realize I had driven 3 hours in the incorrect direction. And I was like, that is not the mile marker I was hoping to see. Are there any mile markers throughout this next year that could kind of indicate, oh, I am making progress and I am moving in the right direction?
Yes, I think what's hard is right now I'm meeting most of the measurable mile markers, like the metrics and things like that you need to make. So I definitely need to keep my eyes on those, but I'm doing well on those. I think the ones that are harder to keep an eye on are the ones that are more intangible, like my executive presence and my confidence and ability to communicate with people and really run a business and be a business owner. Those are the things. And I think for me, the way I kind of see it is feedback that I get obviously from my supervisors and my peers. And so just having continued conversations with them and making sure that I'm doing the things I need to be doing and making the progress I need to make in those areas.
Would you say that those two are probably the most high leverage? You mentioned communication and your executive presence.
I think so. For me, yeah, in my particular situation.
Mm-hmm. Has there been anything that's been useful or helpful to kind of help you, make progress in those areas?
I've been trying to do I've been down the road of all the professional development books and things like that. And those are helpful to some degree. I think a lot of them kind of tell you the things you already know, to some extent at least. But the other thing I think that's been most helpful for me is just being a little more open and vulnerable with the people I work with and kind of basically saying, hey, this is what I'm trying to accomplish and I kind of need your help to get there. Can you just really be straightforward with me and kind of tell me what it is you think I could do better? Or am I doing everything the way you think I should be doing it? Or how did you get to where you are? And just kind of having those sometimes difficult conversations to make sure that I'm on the same page with people, because sometimes your perception of yourself can be very different from other people's perception of yourself.
Yep. How have those conversations been going?
Honestly, for the most part, really good. I mean, it's definitely very intimidating to start them. And I think I've started them with the people that I'm more comfortable with just because that's here. But I really have had really positive feedback so far. And I think what's nice is I've found that when you're vulnerable, it gives other people permission to be vulnerable. And so they've kind of opened up a little and said, when I was in your position, this is kind of how it was for me. And it helps me to realize that the feelings I'm having or the struggles I'm having aren't unique and other people have been through them. So I don't necessarily have to fight through them on my own. So that's been really helpful to be able to do that. It can definitely still be intimidating, I think, just to sometimes admit I'm struggling and I need help. But I haven't really had a situation yet where I've been made to feel like, oh, that's not okay. Like you should have it all figured out.
The funny thing, I love all of that because it is so true and it is so effective. And just like honesty begets more honesty, vulnerability begets more vulnerability. But the great thing about kind of admitting you need help or that you're struggling in an area is typically everyone else already knows it.
Mm-hmm.
And so whenever I see people say, yeah, I'm not like so great at this, or this is kind of hard for me, in my mind, I'm so relieved that they realize it. Because it opens that door and it always makes me think better of the person.
Mm-hmm.
Because the reality is we all have weaknesses. We all have areas that we can grow and improve. And the only people who are kind of dummies are the ones who think they don't or who deny every weakness they have.
Yeah, exactly.
Those are people I have a hard time trusting. So have you kind of has it been those conversations kind of sporadic or random, or do you kind of have a system and a process to it?
It's been sporadic so far. Yeah, I don't really have a system like, oh, I'm going to talk to one person per month or whatever it is. It's kind of just been as the opportunity arises.
Do you think it would be helpful at this point to make it maybe a little bit more organized, kind of have a framework?
Yeah, I think it probably would. And just, it would kind of force me to reach out to more people as opposed to just continuing to go to, the couple of people that I know kind of think the way I think and are a little easier to approach.
Yep. Okay. So for that, I'll put this kind of on your action items as well, is thinking about what that framework could look like.
Okay.
And whenever you're approaching someone, trying to develop it, and it's such a skill, but it's a learnable skill, is to develop a lot of empathy. And empathy, for some people, can be kind of a confusing word. Sometimes it's used incorrectly. I like to think of empathy. It's not necessarily sympathy. It's not even necessarily an emotion. It's more understanding how we arrived, where we've arrived, understanding what a person might be thinking, what they might be feeling, what might be stressful for them, what's motivating to them. And the more, especially in a professional workplace, that you can come into those conversations with empathy when you're making a request, the better it typically works out. If you can kind of align what you need and what you want in a way that's easy for them or enjoyable for them or not too difficult, to where it's just easy for them to say, yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Let's do that. But with each person kind of having a moment, having a few minutes of empathy beforehand to think through all of that. Or how would a person respond if I said this can be really helpful. Sometimes with clients, I even, we role play that a little bit. Have you ever watched The Office?
Yeah.
There's an episode where Pam lets Michael, the manager, do like a practice answer the phone.
Yeah.
She's like, sometimes I just let him get the first one out of the way. It's usually better the second time. I find that that's true in a lot of our professional interactions.
That would definitely be nice to have a do-over in a lot of situations.
Yeah, because sometimes after you say your piece, you can sit back and reflect and go, oh, yeah, I can see why maybe that wouldn't land perfectly, or that one might not get me where I want to go. But yeah, think about the conversation framework with some empathy in a way that it makes it an easy win for the other person, whether that looks like, I know I really want to grow in this area. I could really use your help. We could do maybe a check-in once a month.
Okay.
And just having some sort of framework to where it makes it really easy for them to be like, oh yeah, that's not an issue.
Yeah, I like that.
Was there anything else in kind of this list, maybe one more thing that you felt like I would really love to make some progress? Like if this happened by next year, I would just feel fantastic about my year.
Oh, man. I mean, those are definitely my big three. I mean, I do think there's probably more, like how you were kind of mentioning, foundational things. I think I would love to have just a very secure foundation of like eating healthy, exercising regularly, socializing with friends, just kind of those things that energize you and make all of those things that are a little harder just that much easier. So I think that would be big for me to just kind of be able to, again, just make it routine and kind of reduce the friction to the point where it's just really second nature to be cooking good meals and to be exercising regularly and all of these things that I know put me mentally in a better place to succeed in my other goals.
Mm-hmm. So one of the tools that can be helpful is when you have kind of all of these things for the year, especially if there's a number of like personal habits. I typically have people kind of write out all of that stuff for the year. And actually in the mentoring videos, if you go in, there's one about yearly and quarterly goals and kind of like how to organize that. So I would suggest you maybe watch that video. But to start to kind of stack them, it's super difficult to start a new habit.
Mm-hmm.
It's super difficult to make those changes in our life. But if you get one kind of set and ready, like if you start with meditation and you divide the year up into 6-week chunks, so you essentially have 8 6-week chunks. And if for each 6 weeks you focus on one of those new habits, then they kind of start to cascade. And as you develop them, they usually create some synergy between them and kind of like give you some momentum as you go.
Yeah.
And I tend to like to look at which ones make the most sense in different areas. Like I think you mentioned you're from Florida.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to walk more, summer might not be the most ideal time.
Yeah.
You might say, this summer I am going to focus on meditation. And about December, that's when I'm going to add in like spending more time outside and walking.
Yeah, definitely not easy for me to go jogging in the afternoons right now.
Oh my gosh.
Rainy and 90 degrees.
I've spent a little bit of time in Florida, and I tell you what, it is, especially Orlando, it's like walking into a wet sauna that also has like a fan on you.
Yeah, no, I'm in Gainesville, so I literally live in a swamp.
I think my eyeballs like fog over. Like I need like little windshield wipers just to like squeegee them away. Oh, my eyes are going to start watering just thinking about it. Moving on. Okay, so we've got those 4 things. I want us to practice a little exercise called challenges and motivations. And in that mentoring course, I have a video for each of those. So after we practice it, we'll just practice it with one thing.
Okay.
I'd love for you to take those other 3 things and just do the best that you can to work through those exercises. Those are slightly longer videos, so they will thoroughly explain what's happening.
Okay.
But of these 4, or really of the kind of 3 top, which one feels like the biggest thing in your life, like the deepest, truest, or most urgent?
I think for me right now, my job feels like the most urgent because that's something that really is something that's happening within like a matter of months. So that's kind of where I would like to really feel comfortable sooner rather than later.
Okay. So we're going to take that. We're going to write that at the top of this page, partner and firm. And we're going to look at kind of all of those top line motivations. Like, why is this important to you? And then kind of dig down if there's any, what's underneath like the most rational motivation. There's usually some other stuff there. And the reason this can be important is oftentimes there's multiple ways to kind of ping a motivation or to resolve a challenge. Our brain has just come up with like the most rational or the one that makes the most sense. But there's other ways we can sometimes go about it, sometimes faster ways, more effective ways. Just knowing that there might be some other things, and every once in a while, we realize that what actually is our motivation, accomplishing that thing, might not actually ping that motivation, which I think is the source of many a midlife crisis. When we get everything we want, and then we go, well, crap, that didn't actually give me that thing I was hoping for.
Yeah, that's huge. And that's exactly what I don't want to happen.
Yeah. It's a good thing to want to avoid. So, partner and firm, why would you say that that's important to you?
So I've thought about this a lot because I think that for most people, the answer to that question is usually compensation. But for me, that's really not as big of a motivating factor. I mean, I like money, don't get me wrong. Like, it's great and it helps me do things that I want to do. But when I think about why do I want this and why do I work as hard as I work to get to where I am, I really value being part of a team and part of a community, and having that sense of belonging and ownership is huge for me. And just knowing I have the support of my fellow partners and really kind of sounds cheesy, but just like kind of making them proud. I think these are people who have invested a lot in me over the last 10 years, and I've grown tremendously as a individual and as a professional because of their mentorship. And it's really important to me to not let them down and not let myself down. So to me, this is kind of almost like the diploma of like, you did it, like all that work has paid off. Not that it's not going to still be really hard work, but just kind of proof that all the effort and all the investment was worth it.
And by all the investment and all the effort was worth it, is that effort and investment from you or from them?
I think both. It's definitely both. Like for me, obviously, I've worked a lot of hours. I've put in a lot of time. I've sacrificed other things, but I think also a lot of other people, I wouldn't be here without them investing so much in me and helping me to get to where I am. I don't want them to feel like it wasn't worth their time to put all that energy into me.
Why would you say this idea of like being part of a team and being part of a community, why is that so important to you?
I'm not sure exactly. I've taken a lot of personality tests enough to know that I do think safety and security are really important to me, and just a sense of belongingness. I think that's something, if we're going to dig deep into my psyche, that's just something that has always felt fragile, and just feeling like I want to be a part of something that's bigger than myself is really important to me. I've never wanted to be that person who leaves and kind of starts their own sole practitioner practice, for example. That's something that a lot of people in my position would do, or a lot of my college friends have done. And that just has no appeal to me. I definitely prefer and really need, I think, to be a part of a team or a community and feel like that I have a role within that group.
Yeah. Do you feel like that's something that you have a lot of in other areas of your life, or maybe something that's lacking in other areas of your life?
I do think it's lacking in other areas. And I think a lot of that is, just the amount of time that I've put into my job over the years. That is my strongest community, really. I mean, I have a church, I have a family, and I have some close friends, but the majority of my life is spent at my job. And I think it's just one of those things where I think that's the easiest place for me to see that belonging and to see that sense of we're all working really hard, but we're doing it together and we're doing it to take care of each other and our clients, which I really like.
When we think about like fire, does that create some hesitation around the concept of retiring early?
Yes and no. I thought a lot about that too, because I think in a perfect world, I would love to do what I do, but just less of it. Like maybe have the option to do it on a reduced schedule or something like that. So, I mean, I know that if I achieve financial independence, I'm not going to be like, bye and just laying on a beach 24/7. Like I'm going to be doing something for sure. I'm going to be a part of something, but to be able to have options of what that is obviously would be really nice. But yeah, my main thing with the financial independence is really just, again, I think it's a security thing and just knowing that if something does go wrong or if I do get to a point where it's like, what the stress of this is just too much for me and it's not healthy for me, then I could go do something else. But obviously, that's not my preference. My preference is to be a part of the leadership group and make sure that we're a place that people can work and be happy and feel fulfilled in all areas of their life.
Nice. So speaking of, you mentioned like the safety and security and belonging, while they are for sure something it's just to some degree universal to humans, why do you think it's so important to you specifically?
I mean, I've just always kind of been a little bit of like a stereotypical loner, like coming up as a kid. I was very introverted, just different, didn't feel like I fit in, definitely a late bloomer, things like that. So I think just as I've gotten older, finding a group of people who are kind of like minded and who have similar values and skills and things like that, it's just nice to feel like you fit in and you're not an outsider. That's just something that I think I've always kind of like a limiting belief, maybe, I guess, about myself, whether or not it's rational. I think I've always just had that feeling of like, oh, you don't fit in or you're not good enough or you're weird or whatever. So it's something that I do kind of like cling to.
Well, it makes sense why it makes work such a enjoyable big part of your life. Are there any, because those are kind of two top level motivations, being part of a team and the sense of security, belonging. Are there any other big motivations that stick out when it comes to making partner in your firm?
I think another motivation for me is I don't know if stubborn's the right word, but I'm definitely a little strong willed. And so the idea of kind of being my own boss and really having the authority to make decisions, and I'll certainly be accountable to other people, but not to the level of being an employee with a boss. Like it's a little different. You definitely have more freedom to set your own schedule and choose your own clients. Just being able to say, I don't want to work with this client because they're mean, or I do want to work with this client and I'm going to go pick them up, like that kind of thing. Just having a little more independence over what my day is going to look like.
So it sounds like kind of like autonomy.
Yeah.
Why would you say that's important to you?
I think just in order for me to feel fulfilled, like I have to kind of be bought into what I'm doing, not necessarily just doing what I'm told. I'd like to be able to have a say in what's going on in terms of policies and procedures. I want to have a seat at the table. So when important decisions are being made, I can have an opinion, and it'll just be easier for me, I think, to buy into things if I'm able to have a say in those conversations.
Yeah. So it sounds like a little bit of like ownership.
Yeah, I definitely look forward to being a partner because you really are a business owner. And that's always been appealing to me rather than just being like an employee.
Yep. So when you think about these three kind of big things, being part of a team, security, belonging, ownership, and autonomy, and you think about over this next year, are there any things that you could do at work that would increase the sense of all three of these?
Definitely now, like I've been working from home for the last almost 4 months now. And I think I've kind of slipped a little bit in terms of I always kind of prided myself in really being connected with the people I work with and being that person who goes around and says hi to people in the office. And again, just valuing that connection and that teamwork and everything. And I've definitely slipped on that a lot. And I think I've become a little bit more of keeping to myself and not talking to people as much. So I'd like to see myself kind of re-energize around that and put in the effort regardless of whether I'm still working remotely or whether I go back to the office, I want to hold myself accountable for making those calls and doing video calls or whatever it is to make sure that I'm really maintaining those relationships and not just getting slogged down in the day to day.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned making calls, doing video calls. Are there any other things that you think would be helpful for those connections?
I mean, it would probably be good if I started working from the office every once in a while. I'm definitely have some anxieties around that just for obvious reasons, but depending on how the situation develops locally, that could be something I could consider.
Yeah. One of the things, like frameworks that I like to use for relationships is, I don't know if you've ever read The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the concept, but I haven't actually read it.
Yeah, I think he sold like 10 million of those books in all different varieties. And I think he has one for like professional relationships. But knowing that there's 5 basic ways that we feel like friends or feel appreciated with people, and 5 ways that we tend to give it. And when I think about strengthening my relationships, I try to be mindful of all 5. Let me see if I can remember all 5 of them. It's quality time. So that might be like the video call or being in the office. But there's also words of affirmation. So I try, my general rule of thumb is if I think a nice thing, I try to make sure I say it. Sometimes I think so many nice things about all the people I care about, and I never actually tell them those things.
Yeah.
One of them is physical touch. And in a professional environment, I interpret that as just being warm towards people. You can definitely sense when people are like very open and very warm versus like very cold and shut off. Mm-hmm. Another one are gifts. And I think that gifts are one of the easiest ones. Like it's such low hanging fruit because it doesn't have to even be a fantastic gift to be a good gift. I have like the most fantastic audience. Like I just have great readers and they sent me stuff. Which is so lovely. And someone mailed me brownies last week, and it was just 2 brownies, and it like made my day. It was like such a happy thing just to get these delicious brownies in the mail. And I don't have a brownie thing. I have an ice cream thing, just to be clear for all the listeners. I really prefer ice cream, but brownies were fantastic. It was a fantastic surprise. Okay, and then the last one, acts of service is the last one. And in an office, that can just be like being helpful and showing up for people when it matters to them, whether it's like proofing something or just helping them out with a little project or even just checking in. And it can just be making connections or having like, do you want me to like talk to so-and-so about that? Yeah, I'll put in a good word. Like that can be an act of service. So just understanding like if these are the 3 motivations, if there were 10 other people on this call, all 9 would have very different core motivations. And it can be easy to be sidetracked by like everything you should be doing, everything that seems like a good thing to do, and not really focusing a larger percentage of your time and energy on the things that actually will make your work really satisfying and enjoying and fulfilling for you specifically. Yep. So when we talk about either high leverage or foundational, some of these small actions could be very high leverage in making you love your job.
Yeah, I agree for sure.
So yeah, just kind of thinking about different ways that you could take steps in that direction. And then the last thing we'll look at real quick are in the same question, in being a partner in your firm, what are the challenges?
I think for me, the biggest challenges are time and balancing what are the expectations of my time for my job, and is that reasonable, and am I okay with that, and not wanting to sacrifice too much of my personal life in order to accomplish that goal. So that's where I kind of go back to finding a way to really have focused hours. I think that would really help me because I have kind of decided just with myself, I'm not willing to be that person who works 2,500 hours a year. Like I've done it and I don't like it. So I'm really trying to be really conscious about cutting back on that, but I need to do that in a way that is still efficient. So that's something that I'm currently trying to figure out what that balance is going to look like. And kind of related to that, another challenge I have is just trying not to compare myself too much to the other partners and just having them be on board and having people be on board with the fact that there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, and maybe the way that I'm going to get there might look a little different than what some other people have looked like in the past, but just making sure that I'm still proving my value and my worth, even if maybe my hours or my, I don't know, personality are a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. That comparison with others, why has that been a challenge?
I think it might just be my perception of myself, but I do think I don't see myself. It just seems like everybody else is so confident and just really knows what they're doing, and they're very motivated and very hard charging. And it's just one of those things where I wonder, gosh, I don't think I can be like so and so. But then I kind of have to come back the other way a little bit and be like, but maybe you don't have to. Maybe that is what works for them, and that doesn't have to be what works for you. But it's hard. It's always easier to envision something that you've already seen somebody else do as opposed to kind of trying to blaze your own trail. So I tend to fall into that trap a lot of just comparing myself to the way I've seen other people do it, as opposed to kind of getting creative and being like, well, what is my vision for my path rather than just following someone else.
Mm-hmm. So at the core of challenges, we usually have three different options. We figure out like, oh yeah, this is kind of what's actually going on. Sometimes it'll self-correct. Sometimes just the sheer act of saying it out loud allows our brain to go, actually, that's not really true. Huh, I don't know why I thought that. It's like you pull it out of the dark and it evaporates. So sometimes we self-correct. Sometimes we can find a more helpful perspective. Oftentimes just the way we look at a situation is half the problem. And if we look at it a different way, then it's not really a problem. Or the third one is we can start to problem solve it, or some combination of those three. And one of my suggestions for this, you mentioned, I might do it differently than others. If this is like the definition of the leader, they're super confident and they're hard charging and like I'm not exactly that person, one of the ways we might be able to problem solve that is actively looking for other leaders like you. There's a lot of different kinds of leaders out there. And unfortunately, sometimes we have a tendency to be drawn to everything we're not.
Yep.
All the leaders we notice are the ones that we're like, I don't know if I could ever do that. We don't pay as much of attention to the ones that we're like, oh, that's how they lead? Wait, that's how that looks like? Huh. Well, that's kind of like me. I could do it that way. So that might be a great action item, because there's just so many different kinds of leaders. And even if like, I kind of like the Enneagram personality test, and if your Enneagram number, I might even just Google leaders who are an Enneagram 5.
Yeah, that's cool. That's a good idea.
And start to pay attention to how they do it. Follow them on social, follow their companies, sign up for their newsletters. There's an exercise sometimes I give people. It sounds kind of silly, but it's making a list of all your future friends. And by future friends, it's just people that you see out in the world somehow. They're on the internet or in your community, and there's just something about them that resonates with you. Like you connect and you like it and it's interesting or it's compelling or it's not even necessarily exactly what you do, but you're like, there's something about that person that for me, I think about it as like, I want to create work that person would respect. So me and you, before we started recording, I think we didn't catch the recording, the delightful interaction on Instagram of Brene Brown and Jonathan Van Ness, who randomly met each other on a hiking trail. Like there's something about both of these humans that I'm like, oh, like there's something. So they are on my future friends list. Just putting that out there, Brene and Jonathan. I'm going to start hiking a heck of a lot more.
I know, right?
As if I needed more of a reason. But that might be a great action step to just see those other models and to help resolve that comparison with others.
Yeah.
So doubling back to the time and kind of expectation, why has that been a challenge?
I think it's just a struggle to find out like what's a balance and figuring out where to set that boundary and how to stick to that boundary. And for me, there's some level of guilt with saying I want to leave at 5 every day. So is that fair to the people who work for me that I'm not available if they need me and things like that? So I'm kind of trying to figure out what is the right balance between working too much and working too little? Or is it even an hours thing? And is it just, this is what needs to get done? And however quickly or long it takes me to get that done, then that's what matters more than checking a box of here's how many hours I work.
Yeah. What has been the challenge in kind of either setting those boundaries or communicating them with others?
I don't know. I mean, I think honestly, it's objectively been going pretty well. Like, I think I've started doing it during this quarantine period, quote unquote, because I've been working from home. And I think I just said, I'm just going to work what I want to work, and that's going to be okay because that's all I have mentally to offer right now. And I haven't had anybody push back on me. So that's been really nice. I think it's probably for me a little more of an internal. I've never been the I'm just going to do the bare minimum type of person. So it's kind of getting over that overachiever mentality in my head and wanting to be top of the class and all of that baloney, and just kind of say it's okay if you're just doing what's expected of you and not wildly exceeding expectations. Because nobody's telling you that you're not doing a good job, and nobody's telling you that this is a problem, and you're happier. Like, I've been much happier over the past few months, like having more time for myself. So maybe it's just a matter of kind of trusting that process and trusting that the people who you work with would tell you if there was an issue. And I think that's maybe where my struggle is that trust of like, oh, are people just telling me that everything's fine? But really they're like, oh gosh, it's like always off at 4:59, like one of those type of situations.
Yeah. So maybe in thinking about, well, for one thing, in the self-correct, in the last few months, has anyone voiced that concern about your availability?
Well, yes. So we have upward evaluations at where I work, and so they're anonymous, but they were overall really good. But I did have a few comments that said, like, the only thing that is difficult is that it can be hard to get a hold of her sometimes, which is true because I'm in meetings a lot of the day, things like that. So I think that's where none of the people who I work for have told me that it's been an issue, but some of the people who work for me, it seems like do struggle with it because I haven't really been available to answer their questions or to help them as much as I would like to be available to help.
It doesn't sound like it's so much that you leave at 5, but that so much of your day is kind of already committed.
Yes, exactly.
That's kind of two different
that's true.
problems.
That's true.
But maybe we can resolve both of them.
Yes.
So being as you've gotten this feedback, like for people who work for you, it's difficult sometimes for them to connect with you. Is there any way that you could either create a specific time or space or help them understand when is the best time or the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, I've thought about that, and I'm trying to do more, like just to basically do everything through calendar. So I'm sharing my calendar with all of the people who work with me so that they can look at it, schedule a time to call me based on what they see on my calendar. Because in theory, if I'm using that properly, then they should be able to see when I'm available. So I am trying to do that. I've toyed with the idea of office hours. I don't love because I would rather it be flexible, but I guess that's something I could try to see if that works better maybe.
Or you might be able to try a combination of those two. For me, I kind of schedule out my week on Sunday and I kind of look at where everything is and I plug different time blocks in around my meetings that are already set. You might be able to plug in some office hours into your calendar so that one, like this is my time to be available. Everyone can see that you've actually have something on the calendar for this time so they can't add you to a meeting.
Yeah.
But for your employees to know, like, this is the best time to reach me. This is the time that I plan to be available.
Yeah.
So kind of a mix of both. And especially as an employer, like I said, I've hired a lot of people. I've been an employee in a lot of places and I've managed maybe 200 or 300 people. It's important with your employees to like be really clear of what does work best and not just like hope that they figure it out.
Yeah.
So what is your best time to get a hold of you? When are you typically not available? Which method do you prefer that they reach out? Would you rather someone just stop by your office? Would you rather them email you, call you, text you? Like, what works the best for you?
Yeah, that's a good point. Definitely be more upfront in communication and expectations.
Yeah. And there again, it makes it work better for both of you because they get to like go to the most consistent, reliable form of communication. And so their needs get met and your needs get met.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
And then on the other side, like you setting boundaries of like how many hours you work, we could maybe find some synergy with this other idea of having more consistent communication. Maybe that's something that you can address with someone in management that you trust and that has been through a similar thing. Like, I want to be really productive here. And I know I'm a little bit more productive if I have some personal time. How have you navigated this? If I start experimenting with this, will you tell me if it feels off or wrong or if people are upset? Like, I'm still trying to figure it out.
Yeah, that'll help. See how other people have done it.
Yeah. And I find the more specific I am about what kind of feedback I want, the more of that feedback I get versus like general feedback. Like, how am I doing?
Yeah.
Like, how am I communicating with team members? Like, how is my tone? How am I turning things in on time? Am I always late for things? I was 10 minutes late today, which is why that one came top of mind. So your action items, I would watch the challenges and motivations video. I would start your 2-minute meditation, being extra curious about any hesitations that you feel around it. Brainstorm any framework for having those conversations, including the right people in the conversations, how often they should happen, and then just be more intentional about connecting with your coworkers because that is such a big part of your motivation. And maybe experiment by like trying all 5. With everyone home, maybe you send lunch to a coworker, like Uber eats them food. If you were in the office together, you might buy them lunch occasionally, or you do like a pizza party and like everyone gets pizza delivered and you guys like do a Zoom call and it's off the clock and there's adult beverages. Who knows?
Yeah.
Be creative. But finding those ways to connect. Yeah. Or maybe like a parking lot meeting early in the morning because it's 1,000 degrees there right now. Could do like a parking lot breakfast.
Yeah, that would be cool.
You can all stay in your cars, just like park in a big circle, 6 feet apart, bring some like Panera catering. Okay, I'd like to end each conversation by asking what was the most helpful part of this conversation?
I mean, I definitely always love having action items because I feel like that's what I struggle with the most. Like I have all these thoughts swirling around in my head and then I never come to any decision about what to actually do about them. So that has been really helpful. And then I really like the challenges and motivation exercise. And I'm looking forward to watching that video because I think that says a lot about what's going to work for me is playing to those strengths.
Yep. Yay. Well, it was great meeting you via Skype. Good luck on that. If you have any questions, just shoot me an email. Yeah. And I'm excited to see how it starts to all come together.
Thank you. I'm excited too. And I definitely appreciate your help. This has been really good.
If you got value from today's episode, press the subscribe button on the platform you're listening to this on. Just lets the provider know you're getting value from the show and you want to be here when we produce additional content. All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
You've been listening to ChooseFI Radio Podcast, where we help middle-class America build wealth, one life hack at a time.